Well, I ran out of storage space, so we're going to have to do this in two parts. Back to lymphatic tissue. So we have a couple different kinds that we need to talk about. The first is the diffuse lymphatic tissue, and this would be concentrations of lymphatic tissue that does not have a clear boundary. It's found in your mucous membranes. A good example is inside your lower lip, around the lymph nodules, inside the spleen. And we have a nice picture in your coloring book, which you guys didn't color. I'll show you that in a second. We also have the lymph nodules. Now this is lymphatic tissue that's arranged into a compact, somewhat spherical structure found under the mucous membranes in the throat, the Peyer's patches, which are in the small intestine, also in your appendix. And I'm going to bring this in here and let the camera focus in on it. So this is page 126 that you did not have to color, but if you wanted to see more information about those kinds of tissues and where they're located, you can see it there. The final variation on lymphatic tissue that we'll talk about is the lymph node. These are encapsulated masses of lymphatic tissue, they're much more structured, and you can see a good example of that in figure 12.4. Here's a picture of a lymph node for you. You'll note it has this capsule which encloses it. It has afferent lymphatic vessels, which are vessels which are coming in. Remember, afferent always means it's coming in. Efferent means it's exiting. So you can think E for exit. That would help you. And notice that while you have many afferent lymphatic vessels, we typically only have one efferent lymphatic vessel. That's what it says in your text. You'll also see that within the lymph node there are lymph nodules, which we learned about, those spherical arrangements of lymph cells, and also the trabeculae, how this structure folds in and gives this thing more rigidity inside. There are also the reticular fibers, which are not shown in that particular drawing, but they extend from the trabeculae and form a network of connective tissue throughout the node. It helps it to maintain its shape. So what does a lymph node do? The first thing that a lymph node does is that it filters the lymph. That's the fluid in the lymph vessels, and it tests it. The macrophages that exist inside of the node do that function. As we noted before, there are multiple afferent lymph vessels that bring lymph to the node, but all the lymph exits the node through only one efferent vessel, and that efferent vessel becomes an afferent vessel to another node. The lymph nodes also produce lymphocytes, which are one of those types of white blood cells we learned about in the last module, and sends them out into the bloodstream to fight infection. The last thing that we want to know about the lymph nodes is that they filter the lymph and they send clean fluid back to the circulation. So the macrophages and the lymphocytes, they're doing their job to fight infection and remove pathogens and other things from the lymph before it sends it out into the circulation. So the spleen is kind of like a lymph node, but it's larger, and it has a little bit of a different structure to it. Like the lymph nodes, it has a capsule that extends into it as trabeculae, and you can see that in this cross-sectional drawing here. It also has reticular fibers, which form a network throughout it, and it contains smooth muscle within the capsule that allows it to contract. Within the center of the spleen, you have two different kinds of tissue. We have the red pulp, which you can see is kind of this diffuse pinkish area. And then we have these areas which have stained somewhat purplish. You can kind of see them here. And these, here's another one here and another one here. That is the white pulp. The red pulp consists of twisted veins and reticular fibers, which are full of blood cells that were in the capillaries of the spleen. So if we go back and look at that, you can see all those little red dots. Those are red blood cells. The white pulp is made of diffuse lymphatic tissue and lymph nodules, just like in a lymph node. The spleen filters the blood for pathogens. If pathogens are found, then a response is stimulated from the diffuse lymphatic tissue or nodules that are inside of the spleen. The spleen also cleans the blood of worn-out red blood cells, and this is sort of an amazing statistic. About 2 million red blood cells every second are removed. And my favorite thing is that the macrophages in the red pulp are the ones that eat the worn-out red blood cells. So they do a lot of things for us. The spleen is also a reservoir of oxygen-rich blood. This extra blood can be released if needed, and the sympathetic nervous system would give that command, and then all of that smooth muscle that's in the capsule of the spleen would contract and would force that oxygen-rich blood into the circulation. And that's something that your body would do if there was a hemorrhage or some other emergency type need for more oxygenated blood. And lastly, we'll talk about the thymus gland. The thymus gland is located in the chest. It's anterior to the heart, so it's further to the front than the heart, and it's posterior to the upper sternum, so it's behind the bony structures there. It has two functions. It functions in an endocrine way and also in a lymphatic way. During youth, it functions mostly lymphatic, and after puberty it decreases in size and becomes fibrous and fatty, and then has more of an endocrine function. So immature T cells, the T lymphocytes that we'll learn more about next week, when they leave the bone marrow, they go to the thymus for thymic education. So that's where they go to get schooled. And at that point, the beneficial T cells are kept and the detrimental T cells are removed. Because sometimes you have T cells that go a little rogue and cause some autoimmunity problems. The endocrine function of the thymus gland, it produces thymosin, which we learned about in the endocrine module, and that affects the immunological response of the body. And we will talk briefly about immunity just to introduce it for next week. But immunity, the immune system, is the function of the lymphatic system that gives us defense against all of these bad guys. So if you're a pathogen, a bacteria, fungus, parasites, all of those lovelies, or a virus, which is a DNA or RNA strand wrapped in a protein coat, then your immune system defends against those, and also against cancers and against toxins, which are foreign to the body, harmful chemicals. So that is all I have for you today. Next week we will try to meet via Zoom, and I will be sending out information to you on that. Any homework that was due on the syllabus